Carney has a problem with us. He gets on a plane and he goes to China. Does he think the Chinese economy is going to buy his stuff? China is entirely an export-driven economy, right? So what did he do? He came back and said, oh, we'll take their electric cars. I mean, is this nuts?
Mark Carney was supposed to restore Canada's credibility on the world stage, but based on what we've uncovered, he may be doing the exact opposite. Foreign media is increasingly criticizing his trade strategy, and one Mexican business outlet was left asking whether Canada was the one signaling its exit from CUSMA months before Donald Trump said he may not renew it. And if that is the impression that Mark Carney is leaving with Canada's own trade partners, are we really surprised why the warnings from Washington are getting louder? Let's take a look. Kurt Holtman, MP for
London Fanshawe.
And this was a riding that was not supposed to go to the Conservatives, and you took it from the NDP anyway in the last election. So first off, congratulations on that win.
Thank you, Ryan. Yes, it was hard work by myself and also by the many members of the London Fanshawe Conservative EDA and volunteers. Previously, we did have representation for London Fanshawe, almost 20 years of NDP representation, and we were proud to say we swung it to the Conservatives.
So right now, there's a lot of talk about tariffs going on at the annual general meeting of the Mold Makers Association. Now, in your riding, there's a lot of different businesses that are hit by tariffs. What does the upcoming CUSMA negotiations mean for your riding?
Well, I'm hoping with the upcoming CUSMA negotiations that it betters the various businesses in London Fanshawe. The concerns have been brought up, and we have heard from business owners with regards to concerns of tariffs. Another concern I have is based on the last election that Prime Minister Carney was supposed to be the chief negotiator with regards of dealing with President Trump, dealing with this tariffs. And time again, dates have slipped where this will be resolved. On another note, another date that we're waiting for is a Canadian taxpayer-funded bridge, the Gordie Howe Bridge in Windsor, still remains to be open. When will the Prime Minister negotiate on that issue for Canadians waiting to cross that brand new bridge?
Right, we just received an announcement that it was going to be opened, then it's not going to be opened, and now it's going to be opened, now it's not. We don't know when it's going to be open now. So if we can't even open a bridge, what does that mean when we're looking at the broader issue of tariffs and CUSMA when it comes to negotiating with President Trump?
I couldn't agree more. We're waiting and waiting. We have two issues. And so when will these negotiations be finalized? CUSMA, tariffs, and also the Gordie Howe Bridge.
So, ladies and gentlemen, Kurt Holtman for London Fanshawe. And he, like many Conservative MPs, are hearing from businesses across the country that they need this deal done. They need a deal done. Mark Carney can sit there all he wants and say, well, Canada has the best deal in the world when it comes to, the USMCA or CUSMA or whatever you want to call it. But that doesn't address the 232 tariffs. It doesn't address all of these other tariffs that are outside of the USMCA. This is the problem. And this is what Mark Carney seems to be not too interested in solving, because it allows him to have a big bad bully down in the US to continually use that fear to whip up support for the Liberal Party. Now, the interesting thing is while I was at the CAM AGM, there's another person that was there as well. And it was the Liberal MP for that riding, Ariel Kiobaga. Now, she had open proceedings and, made a couple of statements. She had acknowledged the fact that the loan that the Liberals put out there while they were trying to deal with CUSMA or not trying to deal with CUSMA, it wasn't really getting the pickup that they hoped it would from the actual businesses. And we discussed a lot about why that was yesterday on our video. Now, we try to give everybody a fair shot on Northern Perspective, so I went up to her, I introduced myself, and I offered her the option to come on and do a couple of minutes while we were at the AGM, talk about the government's response to the 232 tariffs, the government's upcoming talks on CUSMA and USMCA, and give her a fair shot to actually speak on that. To her credit, she said yes, she would be interested in doing that. She was just going to talk to her team, and then do some networking around the room, and then she would come and talk to us. So that was great. So we decided to get into some of the earlier recordings, which you've already seen. And then when we came back into the room to actually check in with Miss Kyle, we were told that she had promptly left after we'd left the room. So it's one thing to say, no, sorry, we're too busy. It's another thing to say, sure, we'll be right there, only to cowardly leave the entire premises and leave the room. Like, that's not just rude. It's disrespectful, and it's completely unprofessional. Now, there's probably a reason why that she did that. And let's just say it's embedded in the foreign media landscape. Because we've been doing a little bit more researching outside of Canada to understand what some foreign publications are actually saying about Mark Carney, because we already know what the Canadian media is saying. And, we were the first to report what the Mexicans were saying in terms of the actual trade negotiations of Canada, and that we weren't even present. Well, now we have a very different impression of what other world businesses and media landscapes are actually having of Mr. Carney. So we're going to go over to the UK and the Financial Times. Canada tries to edge back into US trade talks with Trumpian sales pitch. Fortress North America is Ottawa's response to being cut out of negotiations on new pact with US and Mexico. Canada has pivoted from defiance to a Fortress North America sales pitch to win over US President Donald Trump, who has cut Ottawa from talks over the world's most valuable trading bloc. Prime Minister Mark Carney and Ontario's Premier Doug Ford, who have been prominent critics of Trump's trade policies, are promoting the benefits of regional economic integration ahead of a July 1st deadline to revise the US-Mexico-Canada agreement. While the US has entered into talks with Mexico, Canada remains frozen out since Ontario's Ford launched an anti-tariff advertising campaign that upset Trump in October. What they don't mention here is the fact that it was actually Melanie Joly that really ticked off the Trump team. Trump issued a barrage of trade actions last week as his administration sought to reimpose new tariffs on trading partners after America's top court struck down the president's previous duties. Carney late last month told Wall Street executives in New York that, quote, Canada strong will help make America great again, end quote, as tensions mount over U.S. plans for USMCA. So, that was obviously right after Carney's speech down in New York, and this is the UK Financial Post saying, yeah, this doesn't seem to be going too well for Mark Carney, and they don't seem to be handling this very well at all. Now, let's move on to The Guardian, also a UK paper. Carney names broad team to advise on tense US-Canada trade talks. The Prime Minister, who recently built a majority government through floor crossings and special elections, has warned that the upcoming talks could inflict damage to the Canadian economy. He said he would give Canadians regular updates on his government's efforts to diversify away from the US. Funny how he hasn't actually done that. Quote, security can't be achieved by ignoring the obvious or downplaying the very real threats that we Canadians face, end quote, he said. Quote, I promise you I will never sugarcoat our challenges, end quote. Last Friday, the U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick called the current North American trade agreement negotiated during Trump's first term a quote-unquote bad deal for Americans that may be allowed to lapse this summer. He said Canada's decision to slow walk negotiations was, quote, the worst strategy I've ever heard, end quote. So this is interesting because, again, this is coming from a UK paper. There is no skin in the game when it comes to USMCA as it relates to the UK. Now, there is an impact, obviously, because North America is one of the strongest economies in the world. But it's just interesting when you see the framing of these other publications that are not too positive of Mark Carney and the way he's actually handling things. Now, since Mark Carney put out that video on Facebook trying to, say that he, invented forward guidance and all of this other stuff, where's the rest of it? The whole point of forward guidance is to provide regular updates. And the only thing that he's served to do is provide updates to potential business folks. He announced his condo bailout, which was blasted by everybody and their mother, only to try to walk that back. And he doesn't look too pretty for doing that. So it's just fascinating to see these publications making this type of framing when it comes to his negotiation strategy. Now, before we get to the last one, we want to show you or remind you of something Donald Trump said very recently. So on June 10th, Trump says he's not looking to renew CUSMA trade agreement. So this was, reported ad nauseum by the mainstream media. So this is important. It's important because it's being framed as, here goes Donald Trump again, and he's, flip-flopping and going off the handle. Is he, though? In order to answer that question, we're going to go back to Mexico. And we're going to go back to a publication that came out shortly after Mark Carney's Davos speech. And this completely reframes the entire U.S. response. In addition to why maybe the U.S. is waiting for Canada to actually come to the table instead of chasing after us. Check this out. From El Economista, again translated from Spanish to English, Carney in Davos, is Canada saying goodbye to the USMCA? You must read or listen to Mark Carney's message in Davos because it is an extraordinary speech and because it offers clues about the future of North America. The Prime Minister of Canada is saying no to Donald Trump and his negotiation style. Perhaps he is saying goodbye to the USMCA. In any case, he draws a red line in what will be the review of the trade agreement. Quote, the major powers are using economic integration as a weapon, tariffs as a leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chain as vulnerabilities to be exploited, end quote. He reaffirmed his intention to seek alliances beyond those he currently has. Quote, it's about building coalitions that work with partners who share enough common ground to act together, end quote. In this regard, it's worth noting that Canada recently signed an agreement with China on electric vehicles and agricultural products. They're also pursuing an oil deal that would allow China to replace its purchases from Venezuela. Canada also made contact with Qatar. He stated that his country is seeking free trade agreements with Mercosur, India, Thailand, the Philippines, and the countries of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. He made no mention of the relationship with Mexico, but he did offer a few lines that would be worth carefully analyzing at the Ministry of Economy and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Quote, in a world of rivalry between powers, middle-income countries have a choice, compete with each other to obtain favors or form an alliance to create a third way with impact, end quote. The lack of explicit mention of Mexico perhaps implies that there was no follow-up to the September visit to Mexico City, when the Canadian Prime Minister made clear his intention to deepen bilateral economic ties. Now, this is interesting, but it's not the only ones. There's publications in Japan that are calling concern about Mark Carney and what he's doing with China, and other countries that are calling on the same concerns about him dealing with China, seemingly contradicting his Davosian speech. And here you have Mexico saying, where are you? What are you doing? Are you leaving USMCA because that's the impression you're giving us? And when you're talking about all these alliances, you seem to be not interested in talking to Mexico at all. You were here in September. You said you wanted to deepen ties. But what have you done since? So this is the impression Mark Carney is leaving other trading partners outside the US. So we ask the question, if you're offending Japan, G7 country, if you're offending the United States, which, objectively, there's going to be some conflict of interest depending on who is talking on what talking point. But you said you were going to cuddle up to Mexico to try to gain leverage over Donald Trump, but then you didn't follow that up, only to then give Mexico the impression that you didn't want to deal with them at all. And you're giving the UK the impression that you're bungling this all up. So this is the impression that Canada, Mark Carney, seems to be leaving on all of these other countries. So is it any wonder that the United States is now saying, forget it. Is it any wonder, putting that context into play, remember, this article was written months and months ago, in the fall. And now you have Donald Trump coming out and saying, well, fine, what's the point in renewing it? If Mark Carney hasn't talked to Trump, says, who cares, when he's asked, are you talking to Trump? What impression is to be left whether Canada is interested in renewing CUSMA at all? This completely changes how this is framed now. And it completely changes what impression you would expect both Mexico and the United States to have when it comes to Canada's interest in renewing CUSMA/USMCA. So, is it any wonder that one of Trump's cabinet officials was on a panel a couple months ago and characterized Canada's strategy like this?
There are parts of Mexico that are fundamental to us. There are parts of Canada, their energy and other things that are important to us. But the concept of taking an auto plant out of Ohio and Michigan and putting it in Mexico to break the union and to break our people is nuts. It was a bad industrial policy. It harmed America. President Trump is going to fix it. He's bringing it back. You're going to see it get brought back. And I think it needs to be reimagined and needs to be readdressed. There's plenty of good in it, but there's a huge amount of bad in it and needs to be reconsidered for the benefit of America.
The former top Canadian trade negotiator said the other day that time is on...
Christopher Friedland is like the worst?
No, a guy, I'm blanking on his name here, but the time is on our side because the pressures on the U.S. are only going to increase over time. Basically, you guys are in political trouble. The longer they wait, the better a deal you're going to have to do.
Good for them. That is like the worst strategy I've ever heard. They suck. Look, we are a $30 trillion economy, right? We are the consumer of the world, okay? Carney has a problem with us. He gets on a plane and he goes to China. Does he think the Chinese economy is going to buy his stuff? China is entirely an export-driven economy, right? So what did he do? He came back and said, oh, we'll take their electric cars. I mean, is this nuts?
This is what we've been saying, folks. You can sign a trade deal with China, but we're not really sending them anything. The only things that we send them are things that they can't actually produce themselves, which is very little. We send them canola. Great. We send them canola seed, canola oil. That's fine. Everything is made in China. So congratulations. We send them canola, and that still has some sort of tariff on it, but they're allowed to send us a whole bunch of cars. Tens of thousands of EVs. And it's going to completely disrupt our auto industry. And it's going to completely disrupt what our manufacturing industry is actually capable of. Because that will have a direct impact on the USMCA. Now, Mark Carney seems to think that's going to give us some sort of leverage. I guess we'll see. The problem is you haven't been talking at all. At all. Confirmed by Mexico. Confirmed by other publications outside of Canada. Said we've been frozen out. So, ladies and gentlemen, this just further indicts the lack of leadership that has been going on in Ottawa when it comes to leveraging the lottery ticket, the winning lottery ticket that we've had since Canada was actually formed. We are sitting next to the world's greatest economy. And Mark Carney is sitting there, not even interested in having a conversation. Are you kidding?